Welcome back to the deep dive. So last time we talked about, the basics of antibacterial therapy. Today, we're really getting into the heavy stuff.
Yeah, the heavy artillery, you might say.
Exactly. The specialized agents, the ones reserved for infections that are serious, often multi-drug resistant, and frankly, pretty life-threatening sometimes.
hmm These are often the drugs given parenterally, IV usually, needing really close monitoring.
Right. So our mission today is to quickly unpack the key things, mechanisms, those serious toxicities, and the absolute need-to-know nursing points for these big guns. Aminoglycosides, fluoroquinolones, and then a few important miscellaneous ones like vancomycin.
We're looking at the pharmacology of, well, often the last line of defense.
That phrase really hits home, doesn't it? Last line of defense. It sets the stage for why these drugs are so critical.
It really does, because we're dealing with, the huge problem of multi-drug resistant organisms, MDROs. These are bacteria that have figured out how to resist multiple types of antibiotics. It's a major global health crisis.
And the list of these MDROs is, well, it's genuinely scary. Most people have heard of MRSA, right? Methicillin-resistant Staph aureus.
Yeah, and the scary part is it's not just in hospitals anymore. We see it out in the community quite a bit.
And then there's VRE.
VRE, yes. Vancomycin-resistant enterococcus, you see that often in UTIs, urinary tract infections. But the ones that really cause sleepless nights for clinicians are the bacteria that knock out whole families of drugs.
Like the ESBLs.
Exactly. ESBLs produce extended-spectrum beta-lactamases. So if a patient has an ESBL infection, suddenly all your penicillins, your cephalosporins, they're just off the table. They won't work.
Wow. And then there's the one you mentioned, the sort of worst-case scenario, CRO.
Zero, yeah. Carbapenem-resistant organism. These bacteria have an enzyme, carbapenemase, that just destroys carbapenem antibiotics.
And carbapenems were often the last resort for those ESBL infections, weren't they?
They often were. So when you get a CRO diagnosis, the patient might literally have few, maybe even no effective antibiotic options left. It's a really high-stakes situation.
Which brings us to a crucial point, safety. When a patient have one of these MDROs, contact isolation is immediate, right?
Absolutely imperative. And it really comes down to the whole healthcare team being diligent.
We really can't stress this enough. Simple hand washing.
Oh.
Good, thorough hand hygiene before and after every single patient contact. It's the #1 thing to prevent spreading these bugs.
Absolutely critical.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with our first class, aminoglycosides. Names like amikacin, gentamicin, tobramycin. These are powerful bactericidal drugs, mostly for serious gram-negative infections.
Yeah, they're quite potent. Their mechanism is pretty neat. They latch onto the bacterial 30S ribosome.
Stopping protein production.
Exactly. Halts protein synthesis cold. And what's really interesting is how we use them with other antibiotics, particularly beta-lactams. It's called synergy.
Oh, right. That's where one helps the other work better, like teamwork.
Precisely. You usually give the beta-lactam first. It kind of roughs up the bacterial cell wall.
Creates an opening, maybe?
Sort of. It weakens the wall enough that the bigger aminoglycoside molecule can get inside the cell much easier and reach those ribosomes. The combined effect, the kill rate, is way better than either drug could do on its own.
And their killing mechanism is different too, isn't it? Something about concentration.
Yes. It's called concentration-dependent killing. This is really key. Unlike a lot of antibiotics, where keeping the drug level steady over time is important.
Time-dependent killing.
Right. With aminoglycosides, it's about hitting a really high concentration, even for a short period. That peak level delivers the most effective bacterial kill.
And that's why we move to once-daily dosing. Higher dose, less often.
Exactly. It supports that concentration-dependent model. Hit hard, hit fast. But that high potency means we have to monitor closely. Therapeutic drug monitoring, TDM, is essential.
Okay, so if we're aiming for high peaks, we need to check the low point too, the trough level.
Absolutely. The trough level, measured just before the next dose, tells us if the kidneys are clearing the drug effectively. For gentamicin or tobramycin on once-daily dosing, we want that trough level down below 1 microgram per milliliter.
Below 1, and if it's higher, like 2 or 3?
That's a warning sign. It means the drug is accumulating, the kidneys aren't keeping up, and the risk of toxicity is way up.
But speaking of toxicity, aminoglycosides are kind of notorious for 2 big ones, aren't they?
They are. It's the clinical tightrope we walk. First is nephrotoxicity, kidney damage. We watch for rising BUN and serum creatinine levels. The good news is it's usually reversible if we catch it early and stop the drug.
Okay, usually reversible. But the second one?
The second one is ototoxicity, and this is the really worrying one. It's damage to the eighth cranial nerve.
Affecting hearing and balance.
Yes, it can cause hearing loss or vestibular problems, dizziness, balance issues, and the really bad part is this damage is often permanent, irreversible.
Wow, irreversible. That makes it so important for patients to report symptoms immediately. Things like dizziness, ringing in the ears, tinnitus, or even just a feeling of fullness.
Instantly. Any change needs immediate attention. Now, there's one oddball aminoglycoside we should mention, neomycin.
Right, it's different because we don't give it IV.
Correct. It's just too toxic for systemic use. We only give neomycin orally or sometimes rectally. It's poorly absorbed from the gut, so it stays in the GI tract to work locally.
So for things like cleaning out the bowel before surgery.
Exactly. Or to reduce ammonia-producing bacteria in the gut for patients with hepatic encephalopathy, which is related to severe liver failure.
Okay, good distinction. Let's move on then. Second big class, fluoroquinolones, or just quinolones. Ciprofloxacin, levofloxacin are common ones, another potent broad-spectrum group.
Very powerful. Their mechanism targets bacterial DNA replication. They interfere with enzymes called DNA gyrase and topoisomerase a Phi, which are essential for the bacteria's DNA processes.
But they don't mess with our human DNA.
Thankfully, no. They're selective for the bacterial enzymes, so their uses are quite broad, complicated UTIs, respiratory infections, skin, bone, joint infections. And ciprofloxacin, is actually the drug of choice if someone's been exposed to anthrax.
Okay, that's important. But, oh, here comes the but. The safety warnings for quinolones are pretty serious.
They really are. This is absolutely critical for anyone prescribing or administering these. The FDA requires a black box warning.
That's the strongest warning they issue, right?
It is. It's because of a significantly increased risk of tendinitis and tendon rupture. Achilles tendon rupture is a classic example.
Tendon rupture. Who's most at risk?
The risk is higher in older adults, people with kidney failure, and crucially, anyone also taking glucocorticoid steroids.
Wow. Steroids plus a quinolone is a bad combo for tendons.
A very risky combo. And the black box also warns about potential peripheral neuropathy, nerve damage, and CNS effects, like seizures.
So tendon issues, nerve issues, CNS issues, anything else?
Yes, cardiac risk. Quinolones can prolong the QT interval on an electrocardiogram, an ECG.
Which increases the risk of dangerous heart rhythms.
Exactly. Dangerous arrhythmias. So you have to be incredibly careful or usually avoid them altogether if a patient is already on certain antiarrhythmic drugs like class IA or third agents such as amiodarone.
Okay. So many risks. Has this changed how they're used?
It has. The FDA actually advises restricting their use for uncomplicated infections, simple sinusitis, basic UTIs if other safer antibiotic options are available. The risks often outweigh the benefits for simple stuff.
That makes sense. And for patient teaching, especially with oral quinolones, there's a big interaction point.
Huge. This is non-negotiable teaching. Oral absorption gets dramatically reduced if they're taken with things containing inclusions.
Inclusions, like minerals.
Exactly. Think antacids, supplements with calcium, magnesium, iron, zinc, even sucralfate, which coats the stomach.
So patients need to separate the doses.
They absolutely must. Take the quinolone at least 1 hour before or at least 2 hours after any of those products. Even dairy products can interfere, so watch out for milk, yogurt, cheese, too close to the dose time.
Good to know. All right, let's move to our third group, the miscellaneous crowd. Maybe we call them the specialists. These are drugs for very specific, often resistant bugs. Starting with the big one, vancomycin.
Ah, vancomycin, a glycopeptide. Still our go-to for MRSA, right? And other serious gram-positive infections.
Yes, but there's a key difference between the IV and oral forms.
Absolutely critical distinction. IV vancomycin is for systemic infections, bloodstream, bone, pneumonia caused by MRSA. Oral vancomycin is only used for infections inside the GI tract, primarily C. diff colitis.
Because it's not absorbed well orally.
Exactly. Stays in the gut to kill the C. diff locally. It won't treat a systemic infection if you take it by mouth.
And like the aminoglycosides, vancomycin games with risks. Nephrotoxicity and ototoxicity again?
Unfortunately, yes. Both kidney damage and hearing balance damage are potential risks, which means, again, therapeutic drug monitoring is essential. We monitor those trough levels.
What's the target range for vancotroughs?
Generally, we aim for 10 to 20 micrograms per milliliter. The exact target might vary a bit depending on how severe the infection is, but staying within that range helps maximize effectiveness while minimizing the risk of toxicity, especially kidney damage.
Okay, 20-20. And vancomycin has that really distinctive side effect, red man syndrome.
Ah, yes, red man syndrome. It looks dramatic flushing, intense itching, usually starting around the head, face, neck, upper chest area.
Sounds alarming. Is it dangerous?
It's mostly bothersome, caused by histamine release when the drug is infused too quickly. It can cause hypotension, a drop in blood pressure, sometimes significantly, but the key is the infusion rate.
So slow it down.
Precisely. Vancomycin must be infused slowly, typically over at least 60 minutes, sometimes longer for higher doses. That usually prevents or minimizes red man syndrome.
Got it. Okay, let's quickly cover a few other specialists. Clindamycin, effective but has one really notorious risk.
Yes, clindamycin, a lincosamide, has a strong association with causing pseudomembranous colitis, which is basically C. difficile infection or C. diff diarrhea. It's a potentially severe bowel inflammation. Always monitor bowel function closely with clindamycin.
Okay. Next, metronidazole, brand name Flagyl. Good for anaerobic bacteria and some protozoa. What's the absolute must-know warning here?
Alcohol, zero tolerance. Metronidazole causes a severe reaction if taken with any alcohol. It's like the disulfiram reaction used to deter alcoholics.
So nausea, vomiting, flushing, headache.
Severe versions of all that, plus potentially dangerous heart palpitations and low blood pressure. Patients absolutely must avoid all alcohol, including hidden sources like some cough syrups or mouthwashes, for 24 hours before the first dose, during treatment, and for at least 36 hours after the last dose. No exceptions.
Wow, 36 hours. That's critical teaching. Okay, linezolid, relatively newer, used for VRE, MRSA skin infections.
Yes, linezolid and oxazolidinone, very useful, but it has two major interaction concerns. First, it can cause serotonin syndrome if taken with other serotonergic drugs.
Like SSRI antidepressants.
Exactly. SSRIs, SNRIs, some pain meds like tramadol. Serotonin syndrome can be life-threatening. Second, linezolid weekly inhibits MAO, monoamine oxidase.
Which means food interactions.
Yes, interactions with tyramine-containing foods. Things like aged cheeses, cured or smoked meats, red wine, sauerkraut. Eating these while on linezolid can cause a dangerous spike in blood pressure, a hypertensive crisis.
The diet teaching is crucial for linezolid too. Okay, nearly there. Daptomycin, used for skin infections, MRSA, VRE, but not pneumonia.
Right, daptomycin, a lipopeptide, has a weird quirk. It gets inactivated by lung surfactant, the substance that coats the inside of the lungs, so it simply doesn't work for pneumonia. Good for skin, bad for lungs.
Interesting. And finally, cholistimethate, an old drug making a comeback.
Yeah, colistin, or colistamate polypeptide, is an older antibiotic that fell out of favor due to toxicity. But with the rise of those nightmare CROs, the carbapenem-resistant organisms...
It's sometimes the only option left?
Sadly, yes. It's being used, again, out of necessity for these highly resistant infections, but it carries significant risks of serious kidney failure and neurotoxicity. A true last resort.
Okay, that covers the drugs themselves. Now let's pivot to the nursing process. The so what for clinical practice. Managing these potent drugs requires really sharp assessment and implementation.
Absolutely, the stakes are high. Universally, for any antibiotic, you're assessing for allergy or hypersensitivity history, of course, and watching for signs of superinfection like thrush or C. diff, because antibiotics wipe out good bacteria too.
But for specific classes, the baseline assessment is key, right? For aminoglycosides and vancomycin.
Before you even give the first dose, you need baseline kidney function tests, BUN, creatinine, and you need to assess hearing and balance. Ask about tinnitus, dizziness, get that baseline before starting drugs known to cause nephrotoxicity and potentially irreversible ototoxicity.
Makes sense. For the quinolones, given those black box warnings.
Your assessment needs to screen for pre-existing CNS issues, history of seizures, stroke, and definitely check their current medication list for any interacting drugs, especially those cardiac antidysrhythmics we mentioned, given the QT prolongation risk.
And for clindamycin.
Assess bowel function thoroughly. Know their baseline pattern. Ask about diarrhea. You want to catch potential C. diff early.
Okay, assessment done. Now, implementation. What are the big rules when giving these powerful parenteral drugs?
Two universal rules stand out. 1, administer exactly as ordered. Timing, dose, infusion rate, follow the order precisely. 2, encourage hydration unless there's a reason not to, like heart failure. Pushing fluids, often aiming for up to 3 liters a day, helps protect the kidneys by flushing the drug through.
Good general rules. Any specific must-dos for infusion? We mentioned Vanco needs at least 60 minutes.
Yes, strict adherence to that for vancomycin to prevent red man syndrome. Also, watch the IV site like a hawk for vancomycin. It can cause severe tissue damage if it extravasates, leaks out of the vein.
What about patient teaching during implementation?
Reinforce reporting symptoms. For aminoglycosides or Vanco, tell patients again to immediately report any ringing in the ears, hearing changes, or dizziness. For quinolones, remind them about photosensitivity, use sunscreen, avoid excessive sun or UV light.
And the clindamycin specifics.
If they're taking it orally, make sure they take it with a full glass of water, like 6 to 8 ounces, to help it go down and prevent esophageal irritation. And never give IV clindamycin as a rapid push. It needs to be diluted and infused slowly because rapid injection can cause severe hypotension and even cardiac arrest.
And the metronidazole reminder.
One more time, absolutely NO alcohol. Hammer that point home. So what does this all mean? Well, these specialized, really powerful antibiotics are indispensable tools against increasingly resistant bacteria. But using them effectively and safely requires constant vigilance.
It's a balancing act.
It really is. Meticulous monitoring of drug levels, like those Vanco or aminoglycoside troughs, strict adherence to complex dosing and infusion protocols, and being hyper-aware of those serious toxicities, watching for tendon pain with quinolones, listening for hearing changes with aminoglycosides, tracking kidney function constantly.
And it loops back to that MDRO crisis.
Mm.
Even with these potent drugs, resistance keeps marching on. It forces tough choices, doesn't it?
It does. The fact that we're sometimes forced back to using older, more toxic drugs like colistin because the newer, safer options no longer work against certain superbugs, that really highlights the challenge.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener.
Yeah, consider this. When a patient is facing a potentially fatal infection from something like a CRO, and the only drug left that might work is known to carry a high risk of permanent kidney damage or neurotoxicity,
Yeah.
what are the ethical considerations? How do we balance saving a life now against the potential for serious, long-term harm from the treatment itself?
That tension, that difficult balancing act, really defines so much of modern infectious disease care.
It truly does.
A really critical deep dive today into these heavy-hitting antibiotics. Thanks for joining us. Be well and keep learning.